You are listening to Forum Talks Podcast, Episode 1. Today we are talking with Dr. Phyllis Khalifi, President and CEO of the Children's Forum, about early learning initiatives in the state of Florida.
First of all, thank you, Dr. Khalifi, for joining us today.
You're welcome.
So let's start with a little bit about the Children's Forum history. When was the forum established and why?
Well, we were first established as a statewide organization formally in 1989. That's when we became incorporated. But prior to that, there was a group of folks who administered contracts for the state providing child care since about 1976, 77. So we have a rich history of working on behalf of children. So that was a more informal group. But in 1989, we became incorporated, and we became incorporated so that we could apply then for the statewide contract to be the statewide child care resource and referral network. And that was really the genesis of the formal organization.
So were there any other services the forum offered when it first started besides the child care resource and referral network?
Well, we also became the umbrella for the Central Directory, which was a phone service for families who had children with disabilities or special health care needs. And the intent was to be able to help families navigate a very confusing system about what services were available. In addition to the Child Care Resource and Referral Network, what really came under that was a host of other kinds of services and initiatives towards quality and improving quality. The forum also had a reputation or a history of advocacy. So the organizations that supported the forum paid in dues to help provide really advocacy at the state level on behalf of young children and their families.
So how would you say that the forum's vision and mission has changed over the years?
You know, while we've had some tweaking in our vision and our mission, I think overall we have remained constant in our belief in services for young children. I think what has changed is the kinds of services we provided, but it didn't really change our heart, and that was to make a difference for kids in our state. I think our initial tagline for the forum was making Florida a quality child caring state. And when you think about the several iterations of our mission statements as every organization goes through in our vision, the bottom line, it's all circled around what can we do for kids and to make their lives better, and in return, making our future and our state better.
So let's jump on to the tagline then, because you mentioned the original tagline for the forum, but recently the tagline has been updated to because kids can't wait. So talk a little bit about what this means and how this message applies to the forum's mission now.
Prior to our most recent change to the tagline, it was envisioning a future where all children succeed. And while that's important and that really does capture what we want for children in the future, what it didn't capture was the urgency. What we saw, of course, was an array of public policy proposals that had never really moved. We see a waiting list for kids for accessing child care that really continues to grow. And we know that those investments in young children are critically important, primarily birth to 5. But if kids are languishing on a waiting list or in line for services, we're missing that window of opportunity to really make a difference. So that was really our thinking behind Because Kids Can't Wait. It's not about waiting till tomorrow or next year or 3 years from now to finally provide kids those services, but doing it now, because now is the critical and opportune time.
Thank you. So, thinking about the forum now, what services does the Children's Forum currently offer, and how do the current forum services work to shape the future of early care and education in Florida?
Wow, good question. Good questions, I should say. The forum offers a variety of services. A lot of our activities are directed at the field itself. For example, our Teach Early Childhood Scholarship Program aims to really impact the early childhood workforce, improving the education, the compensation, and the retention for those who are working with young children. We know that they are the critical ingredient as to whether or not we have quality environments. So the TEACH program helps to empower teachers by providing them education, and it also is a 3-way partnership with their employer and the teacher themselves and the TEACH program. It is it's an excellent model, and it's a successful model that we've been operating since 1998 with statewide funding. So we're really proud of the TEACH program. We also provide the Child Care Wages program in Miami and Broward County. And that program provides twice-a-year stipends directly to those who work with young children in the programs. And it's based upon their educational attainment and that they're staying with their employer. Again, that program aims to supplement the salaries that are very low in the field and also rewards continuing education and retention in the field. So those are two hallmark, I think, programs that we operate. We also have a program that we just recently acquired called Help Me Grow. And Help Me Grow is an initiative that aims to empower parents and local communities to access services for their children. Maybe they've got a question about how to provide developmental screenings for their children, or just knowing where to go to access services. Those services are in about a third of our state right now. Unfortunately, they're not statewide, but our goal is to get them statewide, where any parent can call their 211 and get the help of a Help Me Grow case coordinator and navigate those services that they need. It may be a developmental screening, it may be just trying to find out information on a particular topic with young children, about how to be a parent. Many times, they don't come with instructions. So that is a service that is new. We're excited about it, and we look for that one to continue to grow. We also do a number of services for others. For example, our Gold Seal program. We would contract with the Department of Children and Families to help administer the Gold Seal program, and that is a program aimed at improving or recognizing quality in early childhood settings in our state. So we also serve as an administrative arm, oftentimes to state agencies when those opportunities arise. We do some local services as well. For example, in Miami-Dade County, we provide what's called our Career Center for Early Care and Education. Those services have changed a little in terms of how we provide those services, which is to administer scholarships for those who are working with young children in those communities. But we also go on site and help teachers learn how to implement successful strategies in working with young children. So this is kind of a new role for us, but it's not an unfamiliar role because many of our career advisors come from the classroom, so it's very appropriate. So that's an important service locally, and we work with a Quality Counts initiative, which is a quality rating improvement system. We also provide program assessments in Palm Beach County, and that's where our staff goes into programs and they assess the quality, and they use the various instruments available to them to do that assessment, and then they provide the feedback and results so that can help improve the quality of services. So most everything we have is centered around improving the quality of services for young children. Now there are a number of other services the forum provides, whereby we may be providing graphic design services or IT services, whatever those might be, to help really supplement and support the field in working with young children. We have memberships that are available to directors and teachers and others who care about our mission and want to help support that mission. And our membership provides an opportunity for those who are in the field and those outside the field to connect with the forum. They're on our membership list. They get our publications, our advocacy alerts, and it helps to keep everyone connected about the status of young children and those who work with them in our state. So it's an important piece of our work, and we're excited about our membership opportunities and also how that program's grown. The forum also operates a professional development registry in Miami-Dade and in Palm Beach counties, and the registry captures all of the information about those who are working with young children. And it provides us an opportunity to really look at the professional growth and how the field is progressing. That aggregated data is very important because it helps us assess, what are those salaries, what are the entry level and qualifications, how long are folks staying in the field. In essence, it provides us with the data points that we need to really do a workforce study. So we're excited that we have those in 2 counties in our state. We'd love to see it go statewide and have an opportunity to work with others in doing that.
So we've heard about the expansive breadth of forum programs, but let's talk a little bit about you. Tell us a bit about your background. How long have you been in the early care and education field, and what inspired you to dedicate your career to this field?
Well, by telling you this, you'll know how old I am. So I started as just a mere child, of course. Actually, I did, my career path was a little bit like so many others. It was a little crooked to start with. I got married when I was young, and I had 2 children. And I decided I had 2 years of college under my belt when I did get married. And so after having children, I realized how much I enjoyed working with my own children and how they taught me every day. And I really wanted to go back to and complete my education so that I could work with young children in some capacity. So I went back and I finished my bachelor's degree at the University of West Florida. And my own children, really were my inspiration for getting into this field. But in my first semester back at school, after I decided to go back with all the fear and trepidation after you've been out of school for 3 years and then you go back, was about doing a good job and making sure I was going to be able to be a successful student. Well, the first semester I took an early childhood class, and they had us working in a practicum experience with Head Start. And at that time, it was a 6-week summer program in my community. And that just lit a fire in my belly for working with young children, and particularly those who were more vulnerable kids. And that did it. And that just tweaked something in me. I said, not only do I want to work with children, I want to work with young children because I wanted to be able to have an opportunity to make a difference while they were still young, and not to wait until we lost too much time or it was going to be more difficult. So that started me on my quest, if you will, to make a difference with young children. So after I completed my bachelor's degree, I was able to get my first position in the field at that time as director of the Bay County Daycare Centers. Now I laugh about that because we don't call it daycare anymore. We call it child care. But at that time it was called Bay County Daycare Centers, and we operated 2 child care programs. And then we had just begun to start what was called subcontracting with other private child care programs. So that was a new experience for us and for that organization. It evolved over time and became the Early Childhood Services is the name it was. It's even evolved since then. It has another name now. But after 4 years after I had taken that job, I was able to write a grant and actually become the Head Start grantee. So the original impetus for working in the field was working with Head Start, and then later became the Head Start grantee. So it was really a fulfillment of my dream to make a difference on behalf of kids. I was there for 21 years and saw expansion of programs and services to the 7 counties we served at that time. And we also added programs that service early Head Start, subsidized child care programs, parent training programs, teacher training programs. It was really an expansive list of services for a local community. But I also served on the board for the Children's Forum. And we were one of the member organizations at the time. And so I had seen the evolution of our association, if you will, because that's what it was at the time. And our director that we had hired to be my predecessor was Susan Munchow. And Susan was a great leader, and she did a super job with the forum. But once we had the school readiness legislation in place in 1999, in 2000 she was asked to be the state director for the school readiness initiative through, at that time it was under the governor's office, but it was called the school readiness legislation. So Susan went to do that job. Well, in the interim, I was president of the board at the time, and Susan had asked if I would do an interim coverage for that position here in Tallahassee, and I was in Panama City, so I drove over back and forth for so many days a week for about 6 months. So it was coming to the time that we had to either fish or cut bait. I kept on waffling whether or not I should take this job, and I was offered the position and finally decided this is what I was supposed to be doing. I've been really fortunate through all of my positions that you just knew that you knew when it was your position, when it was supposed to be. And while I waffled, it was because of my own family in Panama City and the fact that I had grown up there. I really knew this is where I was supposed to be. This was my next move. So I did move, drug my family with me. They came kicking and screaming and have since thanked me many, many times, which I knew they would, at any rate, to move to Tallahassee for this role. So it has been a growth role. It has been one that I've had the opportunity to reach not only my local 7 counties that I was serving, but statewide. So it has been certainly gratifying professionally to move into this role.
Wonderful. And how long have you been CEO of the Children's Forum?
I've been here 16 years. I'm going on 17 next year. I came in 2000. So that's why it's easy for me to figure. It's been a while. It's amazing how quickly it has gone by. But the shift for me was moving from having at least a regional perspective to having a statewide perspective. And then we did from an association perspective, but having the responsibility was a very different role, and also interacting with the legislature as much as this position requires for promoting positive policies for kids and families. That was a different challenge for me as well, but one that I've enjoyed.
And speaking of the differences and challenges between going from the regional level to the state level, what would you say is one or two of the biggest challenges that you've had to overcome as CEO of such a large nonprofit?
Well, I think that the instability of funding sometimes is certainly a challenge. We deal a lot with soft money, if you will, and that's where we contract. And it's much of our money is determined by the legislature for our various programs or by the local funders and communities. So we are very subject to, I guess, the swinging pendulum sometimes in terms of state policy and appropriations. So that can be challenging, but we've been very fortunate too that even though we have been subject to that and we have gone through a period of downsizing, we have also been fortunate to be able to upsize, if you will, and to be able to expand services. So I think that that's always a challenge, but that is just the nature of the beast. I've worked in nonprofits my entire career, so that is just something you have to learn to deal with. The other thing I think that's difficult or sometimes challenging is that the changing legislative members, because we have term limits in the House, and so we may have our champions on early childhood issues, and then after, if they are reelected for 4 terms, that's 8 years, then they may leave. Or they may run for the Senate, or they may not. So we have a huge educational challenge, I think, every time when we get our new members. We really work with them and help them to understand the issues with young children and their programs. And it can be very complex. It's not an easy system, if you will, to understand. So by the time we get them educated and really advocating strongly on our behalf, on behalf of young children, then unfortunately they may leave. But they take with them, regardless of where they go, they take with them rich knowledge of what's important for young kids.
Let's move into the population that the forum serves. What would you say are some of the biggest challenges that early care and education programs face in Florida?
Well, I think that it's consistently a challenge to have, number one, the level of funding needed to provide subsidies for families who are trying to access quality care. Childcare can be expensive. It is expensive. And it can consume as much of 40 to 50% of some families' budgets. And you can imagine what kind of stress that places on families. So the school readiness program provides a subsidy based upon the income of the family. Unfortunately, there's not enough money there to really serve everyone who would qualify, so it's on a first come, first serve basis sometimes, or our families are prioritized on a waiting list. So the waiting list can be long, and sometimes if you're working a job that's where you don't earn a very high wage, it can be very, very tough for families. So I think that's one of the challenges families face with trying to access care. But in terms of the field itself, I think that there's always a challenge of programs who are trying to do the very best that they can to provide the quality of services that are needed, to make a difference in kids' lives. There's a lot of accountability now. We're asking for programs to do an amazing amount of work. And then there's the reimbursement rates are often not enough to really hire and retain a qualified workforce. So we're putting a big burden on the workforce oftentimes. It's not a field where someone can come in and make millions of dollars. This isn't the one you want to go into if you want to be a millionaire, typically, because and not because it's so highly regulated. Because I do believe that regulation is important when in child care programs. It's because that you can't outprice what families can afford to pay, and still offer the level of quality needed. So it's a challenge.
There's been a lot of talk lately about the first 1,000 days. So tell us why that this campaign is so important and why that we should be investing in the first 3 years of a child's life.
Absolutely. I think that we've had a major shift in our country in terms of how we look at young children. And I think prior to probably the last 20 years, 25 years, that it was envisioned that young children really didn't learn until they got to kindergarten. So that's when we need to start paying attention to them or focusing on children. Well, we've learned that, of course, what happens to young children birth to 5 really is important. And we recognize, too, that children were coming to school and they weren't quite ready to learn. They had difficulties. So there was a emphasis in focusing on preschool education. So you can see that movement has really produced some of the best preschools in our country. Some states have really adopted policies that are very supportive of young children. They're preschoolers. And of course, the Head Start program, the typical model, was really focused on 3s and 4s. And in Florida, we had the voluntary pre-kindergarten program, legislation that passed in 2002. And it was created and launched in 2005, but that again, that was looking at trying to provide 4-year-olds an opportunity for a preschool experience prior to getting to public school, prior to kindergarten. So as we're looking at, trying to make these policy shifts to paying attention to younger children, the research was coming in that says, wait just a second, what happens to children birth to 3 is really even more important. That's when the brain is developing. That's when the architecture of the brain is actually getting wired. And that those early experiences are even more important. We've learned from some of the research on language development. We had a plethora of research coming out that was really examining what was happening to young children. And what we were learning is that by the time children were 3, even then it may be too late. That language was being formed and developed early on. The research by Risley and Hart on meaningful differences showed that the language differences for children who were raised in, if you will, poor families was different than those who were raised in blue-collar families and those who were raised in college-educated families. And those amount of words that they were able to learn at that young age really made a difference in their vocabulary by the time they got to kindergarten. So that research was really telling for us about, wow, how are we going to ever help children catch up? Because many times it's very, very difficult to catch up. Then we also learned that a lot of behaviors about trauma, just all of those experiences are critical during the first 3 years. So the first 1,000 Days campaign is really aimed at what kinds of programs and services do we need to provide to give children the very best start in life. Now, from a policy perspective, it's been interesting because I think the public generally understands preschool now. I think they get that it's an important investment. But birth to 3 is a new thing in terms of having a public responsibility for birth to 3, because we typically think of that as strictly being a parent's responsibility. But we know that parents are working, they're under stress, it's a different environment than what it was 50 years ago or after World War II. And we've got to be able to adjust to what children need today. So the needs are greater, the need to focus on children birth to 3 is greater. And so I'm really excited that we're now starting to focus some of our attention on really making a difference early so we aren't later trying to fix problems.
So the next question is a 2-part question for you. The early care and education workforce is predominantly female. So how do you think that we could attract more males into this field, and how would you break down the stereotypes that exist among males in the child care workforce?
Yeah, that's a good one. First of all, we know that women are typically the caregivers. They're the ones who, I think, throughout history have been the ones who care for the young. But we also know that men are critically important in the lives of children. We know that also from our research that young men sitting in prison today, most of them, I think it was the last research I read was like 95% of them did not have a male figure, a father in the home. So we know the critical role of men. How can we infuse more gender diversity into our early childhood workforce so that children who aren't typically exposed to males would have an opportunity to develop those positive relationships? So I think that we do have to really change. It'll be a while for us to be able to really wrap our brains around that and come up with good strategies to attract. Now, we often hear too, well, men aren't going to want to go into the early childhood field because it doesn't pay as well. Well, it needs to pay better, number one, because we're requiring a lot of teachers. So, number one, we need to attract, and first of all, we need to pay more just for anyone who's working in our field, which I think that will help attract more males into the field. But second, we know that men are working somewhere, and everyone who works at some low-wage jobs, they're not all female. So we're hoping that those who do have an interest, that we can break down some of those stereotypes about working with young children. Now, I think that it seems to be more socially acceptable if you're working with after-school kids or if you're working at a Y in some of those environments. But we also know that some of the most powerful teachers have been in kindergarten and in preschool, where males have actually served and later become professors. So we know it's a great entry point for them too. We're going to have a lot of work and a lot of conversation around this topic coming up. And we're looking forward to jointly coming up with solutions for how we might be able to attract more males into the field and really a more diverse workforce overall. We need to look not only at gender diversity, but racial diversity. And we need to really reflect the children and families that we serve. So I think that's a challenge for us who are working in the field, and it's one that we look forward to embracing.
Well, we would like to thank you for being on the podcast with us today and giving us so much beneficial information and of a lot to process. If there's one thing you would like the listeners to remember as a key takeaway from today's podcast, what would that be?
Gee, that's a good one. I think that most important is that every individual has an opportunity to make a positive difference in the life of a child. It may be just one child. It may be the neighbor. It may be your own children. It could be, children in your Sunday school class or in another, in your scout troop. Whatever, there are so many opportunities to truly influence the life of a child positively. And I would just hope that everyone realizes and takes advantage of those opportunities and then helps us as we look at public policies to really help shape what we do for young children on a much wider scale. It's critically important, and everybody has a voice. Everyone can make a difference and get involved in the process.
So as for you, you have dedicated your career to working as a champion for the early childhood and education community. So what type of legacy are you really hoping to leave?
I think it's more like, what kind of change do I want to see by the time I leave this field, or at least before I die. I think that what I'd love to see is a community and a state that values its children, and that I had an opportunity to participate in that process.
That is a wonderful thought, a wonderful goal. Thank you very much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
You're listening to Forum Talks. Show notes can be found at www.thechildrensforum.com. We invite you to come back often and add the podcast to your favorite RSS feed or iTunes. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you for listening.